Britain's King Charles on Tuesday addressed a joint session of the U.S. Congress on the second day of his 4-day visit. His speech focused primarily on strengthening the UK's long-standing friendship with the U.S., and it comes as those ties are being strained, especially over the Iran war. Charles also talked up the American-European alliance and said that current challenges cannot be faced by one nation alone. He stressed the importance of NATO, and he defended the need to protect Ukraine, positions that do not enjoy unanimous support among Republicans and members of the Trump administration. Now, in a particularly striking moment, the King recalled the events of 9/11 and the solidarity of America's partners in its aftermath, drawing comparisons with Ukraine. Let's take a listen to that.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, and the United Nations Security Council was united in the face of terror, we answered the call together, as our people have done so for more than a century, shoulder to shoulder, through 2 world wars, the Cold War, Afghanistan, and moments that have defined our shared security. Today, Mr. Speaker, that same unyielding resolve is needed for the defense of Ukraine and her most courageous people.
And for more now, we want to go to our UK correspondent, Birgit Maass. She is in London. She followed that speech. Birgit, the King gave the speech, but we understand it was written by the government of Prime Minister Keir Starmer. So what was the message that Britain was sending to the U.S. via its monarch?
A really important message is to send the king in the first place, because we know that President Trump is a monarchist. He's speaking of King Charles always very warmly. He calls him his friend. And it's really a weapon that the UK government has when it comes to their soft diplomacy, because what they want is really to strengthen a really strained relationship at the moment between the UK and the US. That relationship is strained mostly recently because the war in Iran. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said time and again that he's reluctant to be drawn into the war in Iran, and that then has prompted President Trump to quite personally attack Keir Starmer, saying that he's no Winston Churchill that we're dealing with and that he's not being very helpful. So the message here that the King has been sending, I think, well, or that the government has been sending via the King, is to basically agree, not always to agree, to look past the differences, to look at the historic ties between the two countries, the deep economic ties, military ties, intelligence sharing, all this was mentioned, and to basically say, this is what we're about, and this is our past, and let's go and also go together into the future.
Yeah, and before we get to the future, they have to deal with challenges in the here and now, in the present. That includes the war in Iran. Were you surprised, Birgit, that King Charles did not mention that war?
He wouldn't have mentioned the war directly. I mean, it's in a much more roundabout, subtle way that he basically talked about the war in Iran without talking about it. Like you played this clip, he was basically talking about the importance of the alliances, and he reminded President Trump that when the US was in an hour of need after the attacks of 9/11, that NATO was there. He said, shoulder to shoulder, we basically were there for you. And then I think he did stress peace. He said it's necessary to stem the beating of plowshares into swords. So I think that's sort of a roundabout way to say that this is where the emphasis is for the UK government, making clear, I think, that peace is a priority.
He also, Birgit, in the clip that we showed, he compared the solidarity that the world showed the United States after 9/11 to the solidarity that he says is needed now for Ukraine. That will certainly not sit well with some, particularly Republican members of Congress. I mean, it may anger, in fact, some members of the Trump administration. Were you surprised that he drew this comparison?
I think it's something that not just the UK Prime Minister, but really leaders all over Europe are hoping to make clear to President Trump that the support of the US is absolutely necessary in order to defend Ukraine and thus also to defend the rest of the continent. I think that's how they would put it. And as such, he didn't come in with a very stark message or attacking anyone. It was interesting, though, that this was a moment when I think there was the most applause, I think standing ovations from the members of Congress who were listening and the guests. So I thought that was interesting, and I think he did mention it, but still in a very diplomatic way, I would say.
Okay, our very own Birgit Maass with the latest from London tonight. Birgit, thank you. Well, our coverage continues now. We want to go to our Washington correspondent, Misha Komadovsky. Misha, you were also following this speech. What stood out most to you?
Well, first of all, Brent, I was surprised that we haven't heard any boos in Congress, something that we've seen with Americans delivering speeches to their very own representatives. And in the speech, the king constantly tied history to basically the present moment. It wasn't just ceremonial. It was a reminder that the U.S. and the United Kingdom relationship is built on centuries, years and years of shared diplomatic principles and shared diplomatic values. But the emotional core was clearly all about unity in a volatile world. He referenced recent violence at the White House Correspondent's dinner that we witnessed literally a few days ago, 9/11. He mentioned Ukraine to underline that these are not abstract threats. They require coordination. They require coordination through NATO and the broader alliances. And I would say the most striking line was when he was warning against turning inward, that the alliances only work if both countries, both parties continue choosing openness, partnership, and shared responsibility rather than threat.
We know that the U.S. president, he said even before the king's speech tonight that he would be listening very closely to what Charles had to say. I mean, there were messages in this speech that no doubt he will disagree with. I mean, what do you say about that? I mean, do you expect the president to come out and lash out or to make public his disagreement with the king?
That's where Donald Trump is very unpredictable. And you're right, there were definitely parts of the speech that could land very awkwardly with President Trump. The emphasis on strengthening with Europe and NATO, defending Ukraine, and reaffirming multilateral alliances. It all goes against President Trump's more, I would say, transactional and, as he puts it, America first principles. And at the same time, the speech tried to balance that by praising the relationship between these two countries and even quoting Trump positively on the unbreakable bond between the two countries. So it wasn't really confrontational, but it did clearly signal a worldview centered on alliances and collective security.
And what is the view from Washington? I mean, do people, particularly lawmakers in Washington, do they really expect this visit to repair some of the damage, particularly that the war against Iran has done to transatlantic ties?
Well, you know, it's really serious when the Brits actually deploy the royal family. It's their main diplomatic asset, and this visit is really all about trying to repair strained transatlantic ties after a tense period, especially after the Iran war. Relations have been under pressure over burden sharing, over NATO commitments, over trade disputes and disagreement on China and immigration. Even the fact that the Oval Office meeting was held behind closed doors with no cameras, which is very unusual for Donald Trump, and I've been covering both of his terms. It shows how carefully both sides are managing this. It's diplomacy aimed at stabilizing a relationship that's clearly under strain. Will President Trump criticize the king? We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball here to tell, but we know for sure that President Trump is very unpredictable. So we will be watching his Truth Social account for the next hours.
That's right. Wake up and see what's on Truth Social tomorrow morning. That's for sure. DW's Misha Komadovsky with the latest from Washington on the King's speech on Capitol Hill. Misha, thank you.